Or, as others claim, will it prove to be a positive disciplining of Iran? On the scene at 6, we'll look at both arguments. We'll also assess the impact of today's swan dive by the Dow Jones Industrial Average. All tonight on the scene at 6.
A making of a millionaire, tonight on the scene at 6.
Black Monday, the worst day ever on Wall Street. The Dow Jones lost 508 points in one day, more than 20%, all the way down to 1,738, and more than 600 million shares were traded.
NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. It is a day that will be in bold print in history books. Black Monday, October 19th, 1987, when the stock market went into a free fall, losing more in one day than it did on Black Tuesday in 1929. And while conditions are much stronger now than they were then, today's precipitous plunge struck fear in the hearts and pocketbooks of even Wall Street veterans. As NBC's Mike Jensen reports tonight, it was a day of carnage in the trading rooms.
In trading rooms on Wall Street, there was panic. Sell orders flooded in from big institutional investors, from private investors, from mutual funds, worried about inflation, rising interest rates, a declining dollar, and huge budget and trade deficits. And all of them afraid the markets would plunge even more. Stocks also plummeted overseas, and the price of gold skyrocketed, as it generally does when there's a crisis. Outside the New York Stock Exchange, a sense of disbelief.
Panic, complete panic. Everyone's going crazy.
What's going to happen to the country if it does crash?
5 years ago, when the bull market began, the Dow stood at 776. It rose steadily, peaking at 2722 2 months ago. Then, in the last 2 weeks, a collapse. The Dow losing more than 860 points in just 5 trading days during that period, wiping out more than 30% of the gains from the entire 5-year bull market, more than half of that in one day. New York Stock Exchange Chairman John Phelan tried to be reassuring.
We don't know where this market will end up, but I think that we are extremely fortunate today that the country is in a very strong position and we're not going through a period of hyperinflation or the tail end of hyperinflation.
But stockbrokers like George Comas of Merrill Lynch were bombarded with sell orders from their customers.
Jeffrey, not a good day.
By the end of the day, the brokers were drained.
Yeah, give me a little water and a couple of things. I feel like you've used it.
And it wasn't just the stockbrokers who had a bad day.
It's going to affect my pocketbook. It's going to affect everyone else's pocketbook. And I think the consumer will hold back.
What concerns many experts now is the psychology of all this. That the stock market panic will affect people who don't even own stocks. Make them fearful of borrowing, for example, to buy a new car or a home because they fear a recession. That could slow down the economy and lead to a recession. A week ago, most economists were saying the stock market decline was merely a correction, a downward tick in an upward market. But today's plunge was so huge, so shocking, that no economist, no Wall Street analyst was willing to predict where it would end. Mike Jensen, NBC News, New York.
Almost every stock took a hit today, but some of America's best-known companies were among the biggest losers. Digital, the computer and electronics giant, was down 42 1/4. CBS, which had been shooting up, lost 42 1/8 today. IBM, the bluest of the blue chips, off 32 points today. General Motors was down 12 1/2 points. AT&T, another investor favorite, off 6 1/4 today. A man who's had a very busy day is the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, John Phelan, who's with us now on the street. Phelan, some people have recommended that you delay opening tomorrow to give the stock market and the investors a chance to catch their breath, to catch up with the psychology of all of this. Have you considered that?
Well, we have considered it, and I think right now we are really thinking of opening 9:30 as usual, because it doesn't seem to mean very much whether we open at 9:30 and 10:30 in the morning. People should know what they were wanting to do. They should be over the initial shock of what's happened, and hopefully they can view things in a sane and dispassionate point of view.
There are also people who say that we should now make illegal the so-called index trading, where big computers just automatically trigger the sale of some stocks when they get to a certain level. Would you be in favor of that?
Well, I'm not sure that you should ban them because they've become a valuable tool for institutions. But clearly, after the last 2 weeks, not necessarily today, but over the last 2 weeks, a re-examination of that product, how it's used, and what kinds of money and margin are needed for that, and position limits are needed for that, will certainly be under review.
Any forecast, Mr. Palin, on what is likely to happen tomorrow after this crazy day today?
Well, I'm like everybody else in America. I'm praying for an up day, not a down one.
But you have no real reason to expect it can go one way or the other.
No, it's very difficult at this point in time to tell.
Thank you very much, John Palin, who's the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange.
Thank you.
A number of factors contributed to today's record loss, and no one was blaming any one development for setting off the selling binge. By day's end, however, everyone was looking to Washington for some action. But as NBC's Andrea Mitchell reports now, there was confusion there as well.
The president tried to ignore the market's fun, continuing to brag about what Republicans like to call the Reagan recovery.
This month we'll set a record, the longest peacetime economic expansion on record.
On paper, the economy looks good.
The leading indicators are sending a message. Steady as she goes.
But the markets were anything but steady. And as panic took hold on Wall Street, the administration tried to blame Congress for scaring big business by proposing higher taxes. Just yesterday, Treasury Secretary Baker made that point.
I think that the writing of these tax packages had a major effect in what's happened to the stock market over the course of the past 3 or 4 days.
I think that's an outrageous charge. What the financial markets want to see is someone seriously addressing cutting this deficit.
Gridlock over the deficit. One reason investors are worried. Big deficits can help push up interest rates. Higher interest rates mean higher inflation, undermining the economy, scaring investors.
Unless the president pulls his administration and the congressional leadership together in a desperately needed compromise on the budget, we're going to see more of the kind of instability that we've seen these last 3 weeks.
Next, the other deficit in foreign trade. The huge gap between exports and imports did narrow last month, but the improvement was not as big as expected. Another disappointment to an already nervous market. Third, nervousness over recent hints by the Treasury Secretary that the administration might want the dollar to fall further. Critics say Baker helped spook the market.
Particularly statements attributed to the Secretary of Treasury, James Baker, that the United States will not defend the agreement that it made to stabilize the dollar and exchange rates around the world.
By the end of the day, a nervous White House sent the president out with soothing words.
I don't think anyone should panic because all the economic indicators are solid.
The president is putting up a good front, but White House officials say they are as worried about what's happening as everyone else, and just as confused. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News, at the White House.
A man who has been in the middle of the market and government policy is Donald Regan, former head of Merrill Lynch, former Secretary of the Treasury, and former White House Chief of Staff. Mr. Regan, Mr. Baker, who is your successor, I'm told, had a 3-hour meeting this afternoon with Chancellor Kohl of West Germany, supposedly to assure him that the American dollar would not go into a free fall. Do you think that will help?
Well, that's one thing that might help. I think actually what we should be doing now is thinking in terms of supporting the dollar, in terms of loosening money, in terms of trying to preserve the economy. The stock market is a leading indicator. It foretells what might happen, not necessarily what will happen. And as a result, unless we do something quickly, we could lose our economy too.
Mr. Regan, as you know, President Reagan, as we just saw today, is optimistic generally about economic conditions. Do you think, as his former advisor, that the time now is for him to call everyone into one room and do something about it?
I most certainly would advise that at this time. I think there are many things that can be done. We've got to work on those twin deficits, both the trade and the budget deficit. We've got to work on loosening money. We've got to work on some of the things that are happening in the exchanges themselves. I, for one, think there should be an end to this program trading.
And Mr. Reagan, finally, what about those people out there who just have money in a CD or in a bank account, the so-called small saver? Should they be worried tonight about what may happen to their savings?
No, they shouldn't worry about their savings at all. They are protected. But I think what they should worry about, be concerned about, is whether or not this government is going to work hard enough to keep the economy going for another year or two.
Thank you very much, Donald Regan, who is now a consultant to the NBC News business program for 4 hours. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Good time.
I'll have more on this important story, including an analysis of what it could mean for the rest of the economy later in the program. And coming up next, The other big story of this day, the U.S. attack on Iranian positions in the Persian Gulf.
Where does it hurt?
Here.
For indigestion, heartburn, and gas, nobody does as much as Malox Plus. Dose for dose, it neutralizes more than any regular strength antacid and dissolves gas. Nobody does as much as Malox Plus.
These days, to have information bouncing off a satellite is not exactly front-page news. But when it's headlines and pictures, ball scores and stock prices, that is news. And it's all going from a Contel satellite to nationwide printing plants. On time, every time. If you have news to get out, Contel can help you too. For Contel, I'm John Ness.
This is Brother Wright. He hasn't spoken a word in exactly 20 years. Now that's something to celebrate. But not a loud, boisterous celebration. More like this. The new FPD Celebrate Bouquet. Flowers, colorful bowl, and a fun box of surprises. So, when someone you know has done something worth celebrating, send the FPD Celebrate Bouquet. A fun, inexpensive celebration worth shouting about, right? The new FPD Celebrate Bouquet. A great way to celebrate anything.
Pasta salad. Well, nothing new about that, until you add my favorite pitted prunes, Sunsweet. Their rounder, plumper shape makes them a great complement to any salad. And the Sunsweet taste? That's the best compliment of all.
U.S. warships destroyed 2 Iranian oil platforms in the Persian Gulf today in what President Reagan called a prudent yet restrained response to that Iranian missile attack last week on an oil tanker flying the American flag. NBC News Pentagon correspondent Fred Francis has more tonight.
It was called Operation Nimble Archer. The Iranian oil rig was the target for 1,065 high explosive shells during the 85-minute bombardment from 4 Navy destroyers. It was 1:40 in the afternoon in the Persian Gulf when as many as 30 Iranian soldiers heard a terse warning from the USS Thatch. Quote, "This is the U.S. Navy. We will commence firing on your position at 1400 hours. You have 20 minutes to evacuate the platform." End quote. Some men did evacuate, but at one point during the intense shelling from 5-inch guns like these, an Iranian radioed a plea to the Navy to stop firing so that wounded could be removed. The Navy ignored the plea. Defense Secretary Weinberger called the small oil rig the most appropriate military target for U.S. retaliation.
This platform had been used to mount radar surveillance, to report on convoy movements, to launch small boat attacks against non-belligerent shipping in the central Gulf waters, and last week to fire at U.S. military helicopters.
The Pentagon said another oil platform was also evacuated during the shelling. Navy SEALs boarded it and blew up radar and radio equipment. The oil platforms may have been an irritant to the Naval Task Force, but Pentagon sources say they were the least significant of all possible targets considered. The Pentagon decided against destroying the Silkworm missile sites along the Strait of Hormuz and the Fall Peninsula, or Revolutionary Guard bases on 3 islands. And striking the bases at Bandar Abbas and Bushehr were ruled out as too provocative.
Hitting a more valuable target, like the missile bases or an airfield, would send a very nervous signal to our allies and to the Arab Gulf countries who've been supportive of what we're doing.
But several Pentagon sources said today that policy of restrained response may be cast aside if Iran strikes back. One senior official said, "We get more bang for our buck by hitting bigger targets, and we've told Iran just that," meaning the United States is prepared for a counterattack and, if necessary, a wider war. Fred Francis, NBC News, the Pentagon.
Iran threatened a crushing blow in retaliation for the latest U.S. attack. The warning was broadcast on Tehran television. The Iranians said that President Reagan committed a big mistake and definitely increased his problems. That warning was also sounded at the United Nations today by the ambassador there.
We condemn all these acts of aggression launched by the United States that has opened an all-out war against my country.
President Reagan said he had no desire for a military confrontation with Iran, but Iran should be under no illusion, he said, about U.S. determination. There was broad bipartisan support for the limited attack today, but as NBC's Chris Wallace reports tonight from the White House, the president sought to diffuse fears of a major escalation.
The president today flatly denied he's now in a war in the Persian Gulf.
No, we're not going to have a war with Iran. They're not that stupid.
But behind the bravado, there was growing concern that the U.S. is now a full-fledged combatant. Vice President Bush said no one thinks today's retaliation will stop Iran.
And let's hope that Mr. Khomeini, irrational as it may be on some things, will get the message.
Do you think he will get the message, given his past performance?
I wouldn't count on it totally. If he got the wrong message, nothing has been done.
And from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a pessimistic prediction.
And let me stress for you that our commitment there is not going to be risk-free or casualty-free. I predict some more trauma.
The administration talked very differently when it approved the reflagging operation last spring. Officials say the president was told Iranian attacks were not a major risk. Defense Secretary Weinberger made the same case in public.
Since Iran, I'm sure, would not want to take the consequences, I'm sure that they themselves will be very much more cautious.
Now experts say the U.S. has been sucked into the Gulf War and that force won't stop Iranian revolutionaries.
It is very unlikely that confrontation, humiliation, making them feel weak is ultimately going to push them to a negotiating position.
On Capitol Hill, there was broad support for today's raid as a necessary response, but there were disagreements. Some criticized the president for refusing to invoke the War Powers Act and get congressional approval.
We don't want to see ourselves drifting into another Vietnam situation where national leadership gets us into this, and the American people don't really feel good about supporting it.
And if the Democrats don't want us in over there, all they have to do is pass a resolution today asking us to discontinue our effort. And I think you would find the American people would disapprove of that kind of action.
Most of all, there was a sense that U.S. involvement in the Gulf has reached a new stage.
The point is, we are there. You may not feel as being there, but we're there. Now we can't tuck tail and run.
And that may be the most important development today. Both supporters and critics of the Reagan policy agreeing that the president has made such a commitment in the Gulf, there is no way he can get out now. Chris Wallace, NBC News, at the White House.
Japanese Prime Minister Nakasone today chose former Finance Minister Noboru Takeshita as his successor. Nakasone said that he picked Takeshita because Japan needs to concentrate on internal economic reform and not be so dependent on foreign trade. Takeshita will take office early next month.
If you bought a new car from Ford Motor Company in 1981, good. Because surveys show, on average, our 81s have had fewer reported problems all through the years than the 81s you could have bought from any other U.S. car maker. That's also true of our 82s, 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, and 87s. With quality like that, whose 87s would you rather be driving in 1994? At Ford, quality is job one.
Got the same old bowl
And the same old spoon.
but here's a tasty fiber breakthrough that's brand new. It's a drumstick. It's for brand new. It's a breakthrough. I said for brand new.
Kellogg's Nutrific blends the goodness of wheat, corn, barley, and oat brands in dark, hearty flakes with almond-covered raisins and almond slivers. Promises are easy to make, but when you're selling your house, you want more than promises. And that's why Coldwell Banker is introducing the bestseller marketing services guarantee. It's our exclusive written guarantee that says we'll do everything we promised to do to sell your house, or you can do this to your listing contract. But we're confident you won't. After all, we're Coldwell Banker. Expect the best. We guarantee it. Remember the Sears Financial Network.
It is 6 months in jail for Bernard Goetz, the man who came to be known as New York City's subway gunman. He was sentenced on the single conviction in the case that was possession of an unlicensed handgun. He had been acquitted of more serious charges in the shooting of 4 young black men in a subway in 1984. In addition to the 6 months in jail, Goetz was sentenced to 5 years on probation, a $5,000 fine, and 280 hours of community service. He was also ordered to undergo a psychiatric examination. Nancy Reagan was described today as feeling just great as she recuperates from surgery to remove her left breast. The presidential physician said the tests show no spread of the malignancy and the chances are excellent for her full recovery. The First Lady had another visit today from President Reagan late this afternoon. It is his fourth visit since the Saturday operation. Jessica McClure, that toddler who spent 2.5 days down at Texas well, continues to improve as well. A surgeon cut away some dead tissue from her right foot today. That foot had been wedged against the wall of the well. The surgeon said that he would test the foot again on Wednesday, but he is optimistic that it can be saved. And baby Paul Holt, the youngest person ever to undergo a heart transplant, continues to recuperate. Hospital officials in Loma Linda, California, said the child, born Friday, is moving his legs, hands, and fingers. He shows no signs of deterioration in his health.
You know, doing the right thing isn't always a matter of what you do. It's sometimes what you don't do. Now, when you eat Quaker Oats for breakfast, what you don't do is fill up on bacon and eggs. So you don't get too much cholesterol or fat. Now, the doctors are saying that if you'll eat sensible, that's low fat, low cholesterol, that oatmeal can even help bring your cholesterol down. Hear what I said? Quaker Oats. It's the right thing to do.
To celebrate the end of daylight savings, Phillips is having a light bulb sell-a-thon. No one else has ever done this before. Right now, participating stores have Phillips longer life bulbs at big savings. Value, savings, convenience.
So remember, it's almost time to change your clock back. Uh-oh.
And it's time to change your bulb during Phillips Daylight Savings. Ow! Whew. What a party!
Imagine it's lunchtime. That's time for a change of pace at Red Lobster.
We'll make you pop.
With luscious lunch specials, most under $4.99.
Make your heart melt.
And served in 15 minutes guaranteed, or it's free.
Make you flip with every dip feel like you've never felt.
A shrimp salad sandwich, seafood pasta, or today's fresh catch. Red Lobster for lunch.
We know how you love seafood.
Try our new lunch shrimp trio, just $3.95.
Ironically, on this Black Monday on the stock exchange, there were a couple of big winners. A Pennsylvania couple holding the winning ticket in that state's record lottery, $46 million. NBC's Cassandra Clayton reports tonight, Donald Woomer and Linda Despot used their birth dates and other random numbers to come up with a big payoff.
They arrived in the style to which they are quickly becoming accustomed. 55-year-old Donald Woomer and 37-year-old Linda Despot, $46 million richer today. The couple live together. He's a self-employed plasterer. She's a bookkeeper. Woomer says he buys $25 worth of tickets every week. He bought the big winner on October 13th, Despot's birthday.
So they had one candle in the cake, and I blew it out, and I said, I guess everybody knows what I just wished, and everyone laughed.
The wish came true, and today they picked up their first of 26 yearly checks, a cool $1.4 million after taxes. In their hometown, Hollidaysburg, a small town in central Pennsylvania, the folks took pleasure in their neighbors' good fortune.
He's in for coffee and donuts in the morning. I guess he won't come back for coffee and donuts, probably.
Oh, yes, we're all excited. Before turning in the winning tickets, the couple got a lawyer. One legal problem ahead, Donald Woomer hasn't divorced his estranged wife yet, and she may be entitled to a share of the jackpot.
Is she going to be taking part of this winning?
I imagine so.
With what's left of the money, Woomer and Despot hope to take a few trips to Hawaii, perhaps, and to the altar. Cassandra Clayton, NBC News, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Some other encouraging news for us. 2,800 striking NBC technicians and editors voted 2-1 today to accept the network's contract offer. But the strike, which is now in its 17th week, has not yet ended because two small units representing about 50 members rejected their offers. NABIT officials said they would try to work out a solution.
The Ford LTD Crown Victoria. This is the car that not only represents full-size luxury, but Ford's commitment to continuous improvement. edition of the Ford LTD Crown Victoria.
Have you driven a Ford lately?
Don't come too close. I have a bad cough and a cold.
No one appreciates the way Mom takes care of everyone until Mom gets sick.
What do we do now? Mom always takes care of us.
That's when the person who doctors the family turns to Robitussin, because more doctors and pharmacists recommend Robitussin than any other cough medicine.
Feeling better, Mom? I was.
Robitussin, recommended by more doctors, pharmacists, and Dr. Mom.
I'm Jane Pauley. Tomorrow morning on Today, the latest on the Persian Gulf. I'm Maria Shriver, also Christopher Lambert and George Harrison. That's tomorrow morning on Today.
Today, Alan and Anna bought their first Maytag and will give it a spin for the first time. Pretty soon, they'll see more lace and frills than they bargained for. They'll wash away the muddy blues, and before they know it, they'll be knee-deep in Camp Pocahontas and Team Spirit. In fact, through the years, there'll probably be only one thing that family and their Maytag won't see a lot of. Me. Maytag. The dependability people.
To recap the big story of the day, it was Black Monday, the worst day ever on the New York Stock Exchange. The market lost 508 points, more than 20%, and the final figures won't be available until tomorrow because of the crush of trading. Now the question is, how will this affect the rest of the economy? Alan Sinai is one of Wall Street's most respected economic forecasters. He's with Shearson Lehman, and he's with us tonight. Could this trigger a recession?
Yes, it could. The stock market has always been a particular recession. It does pretty well on that. It has only missed a couple of times in the 1960s, so the answer is yes, it could.
And what parts of the economy tonight are most at risk in your judgment?
Well, if the stock market stays as low as it is now, then we are going to have impacts on consumer spending, certainly on housing, because the main problem is a big loss in net worth and wealth of many Americans, and also in the retirement monies that have been heavily invested in the stock market. We would also see some effect on confidence, but big-ticket items would suffer the most, and later on, the business sector and business capital spending.
A lot of retailers out there tonight are looking at the Thanksgiving and Christmas shopping season, wondering what will happen to them.
Well, I think that was going to be soft anyway. Certainly, this incredible decline makes the prospects for the Christmas season a lot less cheery.
How are you feeling about tomorrow?
Well, I actually think tomorrow we'll have a better day on the stock market, but it will be a long time before we can erase those huge losses that we've had since August, not alone just today.
Thank you very much, Alan Sinai, who is as I say, the chief economic forecaster for Shearson American Express. That is Nightly News for this Black Monday night. I'm Tom Brokaw. I'll be back tonight at 11:30, 10:30 Central Time for a special report on this day and what it may mean for the future. See you then.